Hi everyone. In today's lesson, we're going to talk about another type of differentiation rule called the quotient rule. So here's the definition. If f of x and g of x are two differentiable functions, then the derivative of f of x divided by g of x can be defined as such. So f of x divided by g of x prime means the derivative of this fraction is the bottom function, g of x, times the derivative of the top function, minus the top function times the derivative of the bottom function times the bottom function squared. So in other words, the derivative of a quotient can be found by taking the second function, or the bottom function, times the derivative of the first, or the top, minus the top times the derivative of the bottom, all over the bottom function squared. So I know that's a mouthful. So in simplest form, we're going to use what we learned with the product rule. So we're going to call this top function my high and this bottom function my low. So what was the formula for the product rule? Low times d high, but now this time it's going to be minus instead of plus. So low d high plus minus high times d low all over low squared. So if you want to write it one more time, it's going to be low times d high minus high times d low all over low squared. So that's the derivative of f of x divided by g of x. So let's take a look at an example and see if we can do one together. So problem number 1 says, find the derivative of f of x. So let's label the top function as my high function and the bottom function as my low function. And to find f prime of x, or my derivative, we're going to do the same formula. So we're going to take low and multiply it by the derivative of high. So the low function we're going to leave as 3x to the fourth plus 5. Now we're going to multiply this by the derivative of the high. So take the 2, multiply it by 10, that gives you 20. Keep the base and subtract the power by 1. Now we're going to subtract. Now we're going to take the high function times the derivative of the low. So the high function we're just going to write as 10x squared. And the derivative of the low function is we're going to multiply the 4 and the 3, that gives me 12. We're going to keep the base and decrease the power by 1. And the derivative of a constant 5 is just 0. And we're going to divide this all over the low, or the original, 3x to the fourth plus 5 squared. My low function squared. And that's it. That's my derivative. It's totally acceptable to leave your answer this way. You don't have to simplify in any way, shape, or form. All right, why don't you take a couple minutes and try example number 2 on your own, and then hit resume when you're ready for the answer. All right, let's take a look and see what the answer should be. All right, so just a quick recap. It's the low function, the bottom function, times the derivative of the high function. So 7 times 3 is 21, decrease the power by 1. 5 times 3 is 15, decrease the power by 1. 2 in the front, 2x, decrease the power by 1. So that's low, d high, minus high, or my original high, my top function, and then d low. The derivative of the low function is just 2. The derivative of a constant is 0. And the bottom is just the low squared. All right, let's try a little bit more of a challenging one. So example number 3. So we're going to label the top function as my high function and the bottom function as my low function. So remember, to take the derivative, it's going to be the low. So we're just going to literally rewrite the low function. So low, now d high. The derivative of high, so the derivative of the top function is just 3. So low d high minus the high function times the derivative of the low. So I need the derivative of this bottom function, the derivative of the low. So what you should notice is that this is a chain rule. So I'm going to use a different color for this so that you can really see that it's different. So the chain rule says we take the exponent, bring it in front. So -5, and we keep the x to the fourth plus 1 the way that it is, and decrease this power by 1. So when you subtract 1, it gets smaller, so it's -6. And then with the chain rule, we have to remember to take the derivative of this inside function. So the derivative of x to the fourth, where we're going to bring the 4 in front, is just 4x to the third. Drop the power down by 1, and the derivative of this constant is 0. So that is your low, d high, minus high, d low, all over my low squared. So x to the fourth plus 1 to the -5th, this whole thing squared. It's totally fine to leave your answer like that, or you can multiply these exponents and make it to the -10th power, but the choice is yours. All right, let's look at this last problem. This one's actually going to be very tricky. We obviously see a radical. It's a fourth root. So before we can do anything, we probably should rewrite this as -2x minus 5 over 3x to the fifth plus 4 to the 1/4 power. Remember, anything under a fourth root, all of it, is being raised to the 1/4 power instead. That's the equivalent. So I want you to consider this as like a really big chain rule because we have our exponent in front and we have to bring it, we have our exponent here and we have to bring it in front. So our f prime is we're taking that exponent, bringing it in front, keeping the base or the stuff in the parentheses, and decreasing the power by 1. So 1/4 minus 1, we can make 1 4/4. So 1 minus 4/4 is -3/4, right? So the power rule or chain says we're going to take this exponent, bring it in front, keep the base or keep the stuff in the parentheses, decrease the power by 1. And now what we have to do is multiply by the derivative of the inside. But let's take a look. Isn't our inside a quotient rule because there's a fraction, a division, right? So our derivative of the inside is going to be quotient rule. So this is my low and this is my high. So I'm going to put a big set of parentheses. Okay, so what comes first? Low, the bottom function, times the derivative of the high. Well, the derivative of -2x minus 5 is just -2. So low d high minus high, -2x minus 5. D low, the derivative of the low function is just 5 times 3 is 15, x to the fourth. And then the derivative of this constant is 0. So low d high minus high d low all over low squared. So 3x to the fifth plus 4 squared. So that is your final answer, all of this stuff. So this one's a little bit tricky, so if you had trouble, don't stress. We will definitely go over this in class tomorrow. All right, have a good night.